when Americans protesting an American economy out of balance try to step on an American street. Occupy Wall Street protesters thrown to the pavement, thrown against buildings, prodded with motorbikes, pepper sprayed.
Fox 5 photographer Roy Eisen got sprayed with mace. I took a hit from a nightstick in the stomach.
And he was from Fox. For the third time, the New York Police Department escalates tensions at Occupy Wall Street and helps elevate a protest into a movement.
My little nightstick's going to get a workout tonight, hopefully.
Good evening from New York. This is Thursday, October 6th, 397 days until the 2012 presidential election. For the third time in its less than 3-week history, the Occupy movement has grown in the immediate wake of an outburst of police violence in New York's financial district. In cities across the country, rallies today against Wall Street greed, corporate corruption, and the politicians who enable both. And for the first time, comments from President Obama and Treasury Secretary Geithner about Occupy Wall Street, both demonstrating they don't really get it, at least not yet. Fifth story on the countdown, we will show extended video from last night's confrontation. At least 23 protesters arrested, many others clubbed or pepper sprayed or flung off the streets after a smaller group tried to push through police barriers, blocking them from marching down Wall Street itself. I'll talk with Ryan Devereaux, reporter for Democracy Now!, on what he witnessed when a peaceful protest with thousands of people turned ugly. First, the president. Mr. Obama telling reporters he'd seen things about the protests on TV and giving this explanation for the movement.
I think people are frustrated, and the protesters are giving voice to a more broad-based frustration about how our financial system works.
President Obama might realize the protesters' frustrations include many about his policies, that prioritizing restoring too-big-to-fail banks and finance firms to robust health without demanding that they in turn use their health to pull the rest of the country through the Great Recession may have been a mistake. That said, the president seemed like he might yet get it. Treasury Secretary Geithner, even more clueless. Not so much.
I feel a lot of sympathy for what you might describe as a general sense among Americans is whether, we've lost the sense of possibility.
Contrary to Mr. Geithner, the Occupy movement is restoring a sense of possibility and hope to millions of Americans fed up with right-wing Republicans and hapless Democrats, even in the face of last night's violence.
My little nightstick's going to get a workout tonight, hopefully.
Why?
I have.
Fox 5 photographer Roy Eisen got sprayed with mace. I took a hit from a nightstick in the stomach.
Okay, you got it. Just don't hit me. I'm just doing my job.
I just want you to step back.
I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing my job.
Police chased me, threw me to the ground. I was trying to get out to the sidewalk because that's what they ordered. Threw me to the ground. I said, I'm not resisting, I'm not resisting, I'm not resisting. And that's when I got a boot in the face. Broke my glasses, and here we are.
I was pushed violently with the baton. I was not resisting arrest. And 3 to 4 cops pressed me to the ground. Threw me violently to the ground. They ran their baton on my back, like as hard as they could.
The cops are going to be the cops. They have to work. They have to make a living. Like, they're not the real enemy here.
Each new depiction of the abuses of the police on the First Amendment, the more people will show up here in New York City, and the more waves of occupation will spread across this country.
Spokesman for the NYPD said the police were exercising their right to defend themselves from charging protesters who, as you saw, were armed with dangerous ideas. New York City's Mayor Mike Bloomberg backed that spokesman up, saying this is a city that values people's rights and gives them the ability to say what they want to say, I think more so than any city I know of around the world. The mayor hasn't traveled a lot, but you don't have a right to charge police officers like somebody did the other day. Occupy Wall Street is back in New York's Zuccotti Park today and in Washington, D.C., where a demonstration was underway. I'll have a report a little later in this news hour about Washington and all over the country, and we'll move east to west to Philadelphia, where Occupy protesters gathered, preparing to camp out in a park near City Hall there, to Tampa, where protesters are holding organizing workshops in Gaslight Square, Austin, Texas, Rick Perry country, where thousands were expected to protest at City Hall, Salt Lake City, John Huntsman country, where hundreds marched to the state capitol, and Sacramento, where demonstrators say they will stay in Cesar Chavez Park until they are confident their message has been heard.
We are the 99%! We are the 99%! Are the 99%! So are you! Are the 99%! So are you!
The Occupy Wall Street movement has grown well beyond Wall Street and spread to cities far away from New York. And the protesters who are occupying parks and sidewalks all over the country are making one thing clear. They are, as you just heard in the chant, the 99%, which is to say they are not part of the richest 1% of America. So what's bringing them out into the streets? What do the Occupy Wall Streeters, the 99%, want? Not protesting because they want a revolution or communism or anarchy. So listen to them. You should take a look at their stories, which they're telling online on a Tumblr blog. Here's one, quote, I moved home in August after 6 months in my friend's basement. Between my low-wage, no-benefits job and $70,000 in private loans, I could not afford to rent. I'm unemployed and uninsured, but I am in good company. I am the 99%. Another, I am 36 years old. I have my master's degree and I work 2 jobs. My husband has his PhD and works 4. We have 1 child and health care coverage. We are luckier than most. My parents can't afford to retire. They live week by week deciding to purchase their medication or pay their bills. What happened to the American dream? These folks are protesting because they feel like they made a deal. And you might be familiar with this deal. You work hard, you get a good education, you probably take out loans in order to get that education, but you do it because that is what you're supposed to do to get ahead, to reach for that brass ring we call the American dream. But these folks, they didn't end up with the American dream. They ended up with debt, a lot of it. And perhaps if everyone was suffering, that wouldn't be so hard to take. But for the top 1%, the deal seems to have actually changed a little bit. You work hard, you actually make a lot of your own rules, and you end up with more than you ever dreamed possible. 35 years ago, the top 1% of income earners made 9% of all the income in this country. Now that top 1% makes almost a quarter of the income in the country. There's 1% of Americans making nearly 24% of every dollar in income paid out anywhere in the country. So you have to ask yourself, how is it that the 1% is doing so great? They have been playing more by the rules or getting more educated. And here's a really important part if you want to understand why the other 99% are out protesting and why they're calling their movement Occupy Wall Street. How come the top 1% has stopped bringing anyone else along with them? Look at the relationship between the 1%, they're the red line here, and everyone else, the blue line. If you look at what everyone was making in 1945, set that as your 1. There was a while when we were all pretty near each other. There's a while when we rose and we fell together. And then we didn't. Starting in about the 80s, that just stopped. It's around the same time median wages for most of us simply stopped moving too. They just stopped rising. And look at what happens being in the 80s. The top 1% goes way up. Everyone else stays flat. If the other 99 had kept rising, we wouldn't be talking about Occupy Wall Street right now. Americans don't resent people's success. The 99% don't resent the fact that there is a top 1%. They resent the fact that the system stopped working for them. They resent that the top 1% now inhabits a different economy than everyone else. An economy with different rules. An economy with rules, in fact, they seem to get to make up as they go along. When you look at these numbers and this trend, when you see how this looks and how it feels to people, you can't imagine that's sustainable in the long run. That's not a political equilibrium the country can keep going with. And in fact, people have been wondering about that. Timothy Noah, who was a writer for Slate at the time, now at the New Republic, wrote a wonderful series on inequality last year, which we'll link to on Maddo blog so you can read it. And at the end of the series, again, in September of last year, he asked, quote, Why aren't the bottom 99% marching in the streets? Now, increasingly, they are. Joining us now for the interview is Naomi Klein, documentary film producer, activist, and author of The Shock Doctrine. She was at the Occupy Wall Street protests this evening, and so we should begin. What is the mood there like tonight? Last night there was a tense showdown with police. Some people got pepper sprayed. How are things holding up?
But yesterday there was a huge march as well. Of arguments about the numbers, definitely more than 10,000 people. So that incident with the pepper spray hasn't in any way dampened people's feeling that they are part of a movement on a roll. Mm-hmm. The enthusiasm is pretty amazing. Their biggest problem is that the square is too small. It's hard to move. And the early organizers are talking nostalgically about the beginning when there was more of a sense of community because it's so big. So that's the kind of problem you want to have as a political organizer.
Space is very small in New York.
Exactly. So they're talking about, maybe some more spaces. This is a movement that's really growing. People, their spirits are really high. And they're really proud of the fact that even though there has been police violence against the protesters, and we saw those really disturbing images, the protesters are really proud that they have been really disciplined, mm-hmm. that they have been committedly nonviolent, and that this media narrative hasn't lapsed into the usual, cops versus protesters fighting in the streets. There aren't broken windows to point to. There aren't street fights to point to, and it's actually just feeding their movement that we keep seeing images of peaceful demonstrators being beat up by cops or pepper sprayed by cops, and especially because those cops have been getting money from some of the banks that they are protecting.
Now, one of the criticisms that people have lobbed at the movement is that they don't have demands. They don't have a white paper, and some of the organizers call back and they say, no, we don't have that right. We're building a movement. We're keeping an open tent. Which side of this? You were down there today and you've thought a lot about it. Which side of this argument do you fall on?
It isn't exactly a movement yet. It's a moment. Mm-hmm. It's a howl against inequality. It's a space that has been created that is sufficiently open that it's allowing people to find each other. It's allowing a movement to find itself, to find its footing. It would be very silly at this point to come up with a list of demands before this movement knows what it's capable of. The extent of those demands really depends on how powerful this movement is. As the genius of making the slogan, "We are the 99%," is, the sky's the limit, really. It could include everyone except for a very small sliver of society. So why not wait and see how big this is? Because if this is a relatively small movement, then their demands need to be small.
Right.
But if it's a big movement, they can dream big. We can dream big. So the other thing is I think we have been, I call it NGO-ized, in the sense that there isn't really an organized left in this country anymore. It's been beat up by decades of witch hunts and McCarthyism and attacks on trade unions, which are really the backbone of the institutional progressive movement. So people are really in the rubble of those decades of attacks, and they're starting the process of rebuilding. So we've become used to NGOs with very strict, the media trained. They've got their demands, they've got their messages. What they don't have is a base. So there's no shortage of groups that have all kinds of very specific demands about what should happen with Wall Street and what should happen with the tax system. But they don't have power because a group that's working for income redistribution is never going to be funded by large corporations. So we have to work, as my friend Bill McKibben says, in a different kind of currency. Right. And that currency is bodies and energy and passion. And that's what the left hasn't had.